Shalom, and welcome to V'ahavta Yisrael, a Hebrew phrase which means you shall love Israel. We hope you'll stay with us for the next 30 minutes as our teacher, Dr. Baruch, shares his expository teaching from the Bible. Dr. Baruch is the senior lecturer at the Zera Avraham Institute based in Israel. Although all courses are taught in Hebrew at the Institute, Dr. Baruch is pleased to share this weekly address in English. To find out more about our work in Israel, please visit us on the web at LoveIsrael.org. That's one word, LoveIsrael.org. Now, here's Baruch with today's lesson.
The Bible certainly reveals to us that our God is a God of sovereignty, that He is ruler over all. We call Him Lord and Master because He is the master of the universe. He is the king over all creation. Nothing exists that God did not create, and nothing exists that God ultimately does not rule over. But we need to understand His sovereignty properly. And that's why we're going to take out our Bibles now and look to the book of Proverbs and chapter 21. The book of Proverbs and chapter 21. Now, we have a verse that is oftentimes misunderstood and utilized in an improper way. Again, I want you to hear me say, yes, God is sovereign. But does that mean that the sovereignty of God implies that everything that happens in this world is God's will? Obviously, it's not. Now, can God use everything? He certainly can. And God can even take that which is evil. God does not do evil. There is no sinfulness in relationship to God. He is holy. He is pure. He is righteous. He is just. All of His decisions are marvelous and wonderful decisions. But there are happenings in this world that are not related to the will of God. We call these things sin and iniquity and transgression. And God is not part of them. Now, God is able to take that which is sinful and use it for good. God knows no limitations, but God limits Himself according to His character. God never does anything that is against who He is. And we should never do anything against who we are in the Messiah. Now, I'm speaking about sovereignty because of this first verse, and as I said, it's oftentimes misapplied, misunderstood. Let's just look at it and see exactly what it's saying. Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 1, where we read, streams of water. Now, it's speaking about like rivers and tributaries, simply channels of water that moves through this world, that cuts through land and such, that makes new ways. Rivers are not just stagnant, but rivers not only flow the water, but they also can meander and change course, change direction. And notice what it says. Channels of water or streams of water. And what are we talking about? The heart of the king. So the heart of the king is being likened here to streams of water. But it's this next phrase that's very, very important, where we read, Beyad Hashem, which means in the hand of the Lord. Now, this is important because this expression, in the hand, is a term of special significance. In the hand of the Lord means under His authority. Here's what we need to understand. There have been in history numerous kings that are sinful, that are disobedient, that were faithless. And it is wrong to say or assume, well, here we have a verse, and it says that the heart of the king, what king? Well, all kings. The heart of a king is in the hand of the Lord. They make it sound like a declarative statement that every king's heart is in God's hand. That is not what it's saying. It's revealing to us a unique and true statement. We could add a word, it's not in the text, but it's reference with the Hebrew letter bet that's in the hand. We could understand that as when. So when the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord, under the authority of the Lord, what happens? Well, it is like streams of water. And these streams of water, notice what it says, concerning all which he desires. Who desires? Well, it's God here. He would be the subject here. He's the last subject, where it says, in the hand of the Lord, concerning all which he desires, or he will desire. It's actually in the future, all which he will desire. What does he do? Most Bibles will say he turns it, but if we look at that word, nata, in its root, it speaks of a tendency or an inclination. And what it says is this: when, this is the implication, every time the king's heart is under the authority of the Lord, in the hand of the Lord, then God is going to work. When that king acknowledges God's authority, God will use that king, and he will turn things according to what he, meaning what the Lord, desires. But a king that is rebellious, a king who is not under God's authority, what will he do? He'll do evil things. So it's wrong to understand this verse saying, well, every king, that king's heart is in God's hand. That is not what the scripture is saying at all. Let's move on to the next verse, verse 2. Every way is straight in a man's eyes. Now, notice what it's saying here. Left to the natural, left to himself, we are told, every way of a man is straight in his eyes. But notice what it says. But the content. Now, this is the word tochen. If it's a noun, it's the content, what the heart contains. But it can also be a verb which speaks about regulating. So some Bibles will say ways. So every way of a man is right or straight in his eyes. But the Lord, what does the Lord do? The Lord weighs or regulates hearts. And what it's simply speaking here is this. It's a warning. If we are left to ourselves, every decision we have is going to seem right to us. That's what's natural. That's the norm. But what does God do? Well, God has the contents of hearts. And what does that mean? It means that we should be an individual that thinks thoroughly and realize the contents of the heart belongs to who? Belongs to the Lord. Therefore, the thoughts that we should implement in our life are the ones that belong to Him. So God weighs the heart, God regulates the heart. So we need to consider things not just in our own mind, how we see things in our eyes. That's dangerous. But we need to realize that God, He gives to us, if we seek Him, the content of hearts, meaning God will make known to us, not just in the superficial in our minds, but in the deeper. The heart has deeper thoughts. When we go deeper, when we pray more thoroughly, when we seek Him and seek His truth, then God is going to do what? What it says here. God will weigh, God will regulate, God is going to act to change what seems right in our eyes when we are seeking the content of the heart, because those contents belong to God. Move to verse 3. Do righteousness and justice. So he who has done that which is righteous and just, It is, and the word here, nivchar, it's been selected, meaning it's preferable. That's how we could understand that. It is what should be chosen. It is preferable to the Lord than what? Than sacrifice. So what's pleasing is that we approach God having done righteousness and justice. That's pleasing more than simply us making an offering. It's our behavior. So we read in the next verse, verse 4, it's a warning again. A lofty eyes, meaning a haughty eyes, and a broad heart, meaning just being liberal-minded, just taking everything in. We need to be very careful. We should have a filter upon our mind and our heart, meaning we shouldn't just broadly receive everything. We should be very, very cautious. In fact, elsewhere in the book of Proverbs, we are told to have a narrow heart, not just to accept everything as the world does. So a high eyes, meaning a haughty eyes, and a broad heart, meaning considering everything. What is that? It's plowing of the wicked. And what does that plowing do? It leads to sin. So what the scripture's telling us here is this: when we are prideful, when we have an open mind to just anything, that pride and that open mind is like plowing. When the wicked plow, well, what are they going to harvest? They prepare the land, and what are they going to receive? As it says here, sin. Verse 5. Thoughts of a determined one. Now, the word here, charutz, is someone who is diligent, someone who is determined, and it says the thoughts of a diligent one surely is going to produce excess. It's going to be profitable. It is going to have an excess. There's going to be prosperity. But everyone who, and the next word has to do with acting hastily, doing something with haste, what is that going to produce? It is going to produce that which is lacking or a shortage, the word machzor. So if we want excess, if we want prosperity, what should we do? We should think, and we should be very diligent, and we should desire the things that God desires. That's what's going to produce prosperity. But if we think rashly, hastily, it is going to produce that which is lacking. Look at verse 6. Now, verse 6 begins with the word of activity. And it really speaks about someone who behaves in order to what? Well, notice what it says. The next word, otzarot. This would be treasures or treasuries. It's a word of prosperity and richness. So someone who acts for one purpose, and that's for prosperity, to acquire treasurable things, and they do so, they act, and they do so with a lying tongue. What is that? Well, that is going to be hevel. Now, I know that many Bibles translate this word as fantasy. Nowhere should be translated fantasy. It's the word that we see for emptiness or vanity, something of no value. So if we act simply for the sake of prosperity, that we act in order to get treasures, and we act in order to get treasures with a lying tongue, what is it? It is vanity. And it says here that this vanity is going to be pushed away, meaning those treasures, which are vain, and the behavior, which is vanity and empty, is going to move away very quickly. Now, what we see here, if we understand Hebrew poetry, and this is indeed Hebrew poetry, what is likened or parallel to the activity for getting treasures? Well, it's this last part. Mevakshe mavet, seekers of death. When you make your life about one thing, I want to be wealthy. I want to be prosperous. I want to acquire, and I'm so committed to getting things that I'm willing to lie. I'm willing to speak things that are false in order that it's profits. Well, that type of behavior, God equivalents to seeking death. What death? Your own death, or behave in a way that's going to be adversely to other individuals as well. Verse 7. The first word in verse 7 is the word shod, which comes from a Hebrew word which means to steal. Now, this can mean to take by force. It can be a word of violence, but it's a word here of stealing. So the wicked ones, they behave in this way. With violence, they pursue in order to acquire. So the stealing of wicked ones will do what? Well, it's the word yegorem, which comes from the Hebrew root gimel resh resh, which means to drag them away. So when we behave violently for the purpose of acquiring, taking, stealing, when we behave in such a way, it's going to draw us away, drag us away. And therefore, he says, for such behavior is like one that refuses, and it's in the plural, they that refuse to do justice. So what we see here is violent stealing, stealing with violence, is equivalent to one that prohibits the doing of justice. When you are committed to taking by any means from others, taking away from them, you are someone who is denying the doing of justice. Verse 8. We have a word that we've come across before. It's a word for that which is perverse, that which is a violation of what is right, what is proper. And it says here that perversity, if it's the way of a man, and then we have the word vizar, and a foreigner. What does this mean? It speaks about perverse behavior of a foreign, and when it means foreign, it means a non-covenantal individual. Someone who is not part of God's family, that does not believe in the God of Israel or his only begotten Son, Messiah Yeshua. Someone who is an individual that is perverse in his way. This one, if he's unfamiliar with God, notice, such a one that has that, what's going to he think? He's going to think that pure and proper is his action. The word yashar, that it's pure and straight, his action. He's going to look, because he's perverse and he has no covenantal relationship with God, he has no filter to see his actions with. Therefore, everything that he does, all of his action, that's what it says here at the end of verse 8, where we have the word poalu or poalo. His action is going to be seen as straight or right and pure. How? Before him. Verse 9. Verse 9 says, good to dwell upon the corner of a roof than with a woman of strife. And this word strife is in the plural, so abundant strife. And to dwell in a shared house. A house, and literally this word for house cannot just mean a shared house, but a house that's joined, meaning you may be like a townhouse, one house attached to another. You don't want to dwell with a woman of strife. And by the way, my wife pointed out that she would not want to live with a man that is strifeful and such. So it's a principle that avoids those who like strife, that likes contention and such. Verse 10. First word is the word nephesh, which is a word for soul. And this is the very essence of a person. So the soul of a wicked one desires wickedness. So if you are wicked, your soul is going to desire wickedness or evil. But it goes on to say, and he will not find favor in the eyes of his neighbor. So in this verse, someone who is wicked, who desires evil, is not going to find favor, anything gracious coming from his neighbor. Verse 11. Now, we've seen a couple times this concept of justice. Justice is good. The rendering of judgment is good. Why? Because it set things in the order of God. Without God's judgment, there will not be God's order. Look at verse 11, where it says, with the punishment of a scoffer. Now, what's a scoffer? Well, this word is related to the same modern Hebrew word for a clown. And what it does is someone who does not take seriously the instructions of God. Let me say that differently. Someone who does not take seriously the commandments of God. They scoff at God's commands. And it says here, with the judgment, or punishment would be a more exact word, with the punishment of the scoffer, a simpleton, one who's very, very simple in his knowledge, will be wise. So when a simple one sees the person who scoffs at the commandments of God being punished, that makes him wise, even a simple-minded person. And it says here, and in thee, and we have a word here for making understanding. So with the making of understanding of the wise, what will he do? A wise one who is made to understand something, he will take that understanding and he will add to it. Literally says he will take knowledge, meaning that there's going to be a additional learning by him. So a simpleton, when he sees the punishment of one who scoffs at the commandments of God, he's going to be made wise by that. But when one who has understanding, when he is made wise, he's going to perceive that same thing, but it's going to have a more beneficial outcome. It will allow him to take hold of knowledge. That's what it says at the end of verse 11. Now, verse 12. This is the third time we've seen this word for giving understanding. Now, this word has to do with something that is, if we look at it in its most pure form, its simplest form, it's a word that can be translated as common sense, but it's not common sense at all. It is common sense for those who are walking with God, who are serving God, who are obedient to God. They are going to understand things better. So this one who understands, and who is this one that we're talking about? Well, the next word, tzaddik. A righteous one that is made to understand. He's going to understand what? He's going to understand the house of the wicked. He's going to understand that wicked one, the house, that family. And what is he going to do? He is going to, we might say, foil, or he is going to act in a way that limits or hinders or stops the wicked ones from doing evil. So he is going to have perception, this one with understanding. He is going to understand, the righteous one is going to understand this is a wicked house. And therefore he is going to act in a specific way to foil, to stop the one who is wicked from doing evil. And that's what we should be committed to. We want to be a force for good. And I can't overestimate this. We want to be an individual that understands righteousness and justice. Let me say that differently. That we understand what is the goodness of the will of God. And thereby we become committed to the good things of God, His will, His purposes. And anything that is against that, anything that is in conflict with the will of God, we want to behave against that. We want to foil that. We want to act to sabotage wickedness and that which is false. Look now to verse 13. Otem ozno, which means closed ears. But the word here for closed is much stronger. It's a word of sealing. So one who seals off his ears, meaning he doesn't want to hear anything. And this one who seals his ears so he does not hear the cries of the poor. Now, this word poor, we have a couple different words for poor in Hebrew. We have the basic word ani. Ani, a poor person. But we have a stronger word, the word dal. The word dal speaks of someone who's just not poor, but he is in a destitute situation. His resources are very meager, very, very small. So we're told here, verse 13, the one who closes his ears from the cries of the exceptionally poor person. Also, when he will cry out, it says, he will not answer. He won't be answered, meaning this, God is not going to help. When you are indifferent to the cries of someone who is suffering, someone who is poor, someone who's in a very, very meager and desperate situation, and you don't respond, that is going to, when you are in a similar situation and you cry out, God will be silent. Verse 14. A gift in secret will subdue or pacify anger. So what it's saying here is it's good to give gifts, to bless people. That word for gift is giving, but it's a in the context of blessing someone, wanting to be of a good influence on someone. So gifts or a gift in secret will subdue or pacify evil. But in contrast to that, in other words, a bribe, and some will say behind the back because that makes sense in English, but a bribe here, it's the word chek, which speaks to this part of the body. So a person has a cloak on and he has a bribe. You can't see it. It's hidden. That's why in some Bibles it will say behind the back, and that's fine. That captures the intent. But it says a bribe in the breast, along the breast being covered up by the cloak is what? It's strong anger, meaning this. It will produce, when someone gives a bribe, why do you give a bribe? Well, in this context, you give a bribe in order to find the verdict, the judgment that you want. You bribe a judge. So he will agree with your side, your position. And therefore, what is that going to produce? It's going to produce chema, which is anger, a stronger anger. And then we have the word aza, which means, again, strong. So when you give a bribe and you conceal it, the outcome of that, you may get what you want, but it's going to bring about an intense anger to you. One last verse and we'll be done. Verse 15. Simcha, which is gladness. Now, biblically speaking, we have a word joy in Hebrew, a couple different ones, but the word simcha is stronger. So I don't like to translate this just joy because the biblical word is stronger, gladness. So gladness to the righteous one. What makes a righteous one glad? It tells us, asot mishpat, the doing of justice. That's what should please us. This is what gives us great gladness. And it says, but destruction, when there is not justice, what's going to be the outcome? Destruction. And that destruction is going to come upon who? The workers of iniquity. So we find here, there's going to be, through justice, one of two things. Doing justice sets things in the order of God. That is a good thing. But those who are opposed to doing good, those workers of iniquity, what are they going to find? They're going to find destruction. Now, in the end, we can see something good because God is a God of justice. And God's justice has two outputs. The first it ensures justice. It brings justice or God's order into a situation. That's good. The second thing that God's judgment does is that God's judgment brings about a destruction or a removal of those who are workers of iniquity. So God's justice brings things into his order and takes out those who are against his order that are working iniquity. We need to be individuals that are a force for justice, that we need to stand up. Now, before I close, just want to point out something that I'm going to be teaching tonight here in Israel at our study center. It speaks about after the death, and I'm speaking about the stoning of Stephanos or Stephen. Stephen was a godly man, and God was well pleased with him. And we know what happened to him. He spoke truth. He spoke truth before the Sanhedrin. And in the end, they stoned him to death. And thereafter, with the approval of someone called the Apostle Paul, he wasn't the apostle at that time. He was known as Shaul, his Hebrew name. But before he had that Damascus Road experience, he was a persecutor, and he was part of, and a very integral part of this persecution, because after the death of Stephanos, there arose a great time of persecution of believers against the congregation of the redeemed, the Lord's people. And what do we find here? We find that those believers in Jerusalem and other places around Jerusalem, they were scattered because of persecution. But we read something. We read that the apostles did not leave Jerusalem. Now, this gives us something. We need to be people that are committed to justice. And where we see injustice, where we see iniquity and wickedness, we need to not run away. But rather, we need to what? Stand in opposition. And that's what the apostles did. They didn't run away from the hardships, but they confronted them. And as we grow closer and closer to the end times, we need to be people that understand wickedness, deceitfulness is coming. We see that in a variety of ways today. Earlier today, I looked at some news, and in that news, I saw two things. The first thing that I saw was, and this isn't surprising, it's disappointing, but it's not surprising, and that is even 11 months after we see that horrible atrocity on October 7th, we see that still anti-Semitism is soaring. We see, for example, one school district taking actions, praising Hamas, and saying very negative, and I would call very anti-Semitic statements against Jewish people. And no longer wanting to have those holidays like the Feast of Trumpets, known as Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, seen as acceptable days to be absent if you're Jewish from school. So we see changes happening, an increase in anti-Semitism, but also in a state, and I'm speaking specifically about the state of Vermont, the school authority for the state is recommending not to use what they call offensive terms such as son and daughter. Now, why would anyone think 10 years ago that son and daughter would be offensive? Of course not. These are wonderful words. Children are a blessing from God. And you have a male child, he's a son. You have a female child, this one, she's a daughter. Common sense. But no, today, as we see that deceit that comes from that Antichrist spirit coming more powerful and more prevalent in society, we have this confusion. And what do I want to instruct you? I want to instruct you Don't turn aside from this. Don't be silent, but confront it. God's people, the apostles, are leaders of this. Don't go away. Don't remain silent, but confront it head on. Speak out against it for what it is. It's false. It comes from a spirit of deception. I mean, why in the world is a son or a daughter, why are those terms problematic? Well, the whole issue is they are against gender definitions. But we know the Bible teaches God created humanity either male or female, and no one can change how God created you. You can live a lie, and we see something else. That living of the lie, what many times the federal government, school districts, states, governments, and such, and other independent organizations, what they are actually advocating for is extremely harmful. Those people who have gender confusion, and it comes not in a natural way, it comes being taught, and people are pressured. Those individuals are not happy. When you are confused about what you are and how God made you, and you don't affirm God's wonderful creation, when you reject that and deny that, you're not going to have peace inwardly. In fact, you are going to be confused in a growing way. More and more things will be confusing. You won't understand because you are embracing a lie. And that embracing of a lie gives the enemy a stronghold in that person where it can sow unhappiness and discouragement. And that's why those who are transgendered, they're not blessed. In fact, the likelihood of them attempting suicide is much, much higher. So if someone is told, you know what, you can change your gender, what they're saying is this: I want to minister to you death. I want to minister to you a spirit of suicide. That's not from God. That's not good. We want to love others as ourselves. We want to bless. We want to be a godly influence. And I'll conclude with this. The book of Proverbs gives us wisdom, God's wisdom, His revelation, so that we can have a proper mindset to agree with God and deny the deceit that is already in this world that's going to increase, and the source of that is indeed the Antichrist. Let's confront evil. Let's be doers of justice, putting things in God's order and standing against those that want to work against the truth of Scripture. Until next time, shalom from Israel.
Well, we hope you will benefit from today's message and share it with others. Please plan to join us each week at this time and on this channel for our broadcast of LoveIsrael.org. Again, to find out more about us, please visit our website, LoveIsrael.org. There you will find articles and numerous other lectures by Baruch. These teachings are in video form. You may download them or watch them in streaming video. Until next week, may the Lord bless you in our Messiah Yeshua, that is Jesus, as you walk with Him. Shalom from Israel.